the two guys who did it, the two guys who put it together were already endoscopists, but endoscopy in 1974-75 was very rudimentary. There was very few people who were doing endoscopy, even routine endoscopy.
So, like, was it painful for them to get 100+ endoscopies? I'm sure it caused a lot of physical discomfort, right?
I'm sure it was, because myself and my fellow when we started our training, one of the things that we did was we did endoscopies on each other in some of the training programs across the country. In order to be a GI fellow, that was one of the first things you did, was have an endoscopy to see what it felt like. Now, I didn't have to, because when I came in, I was late in the program, but there were guys who did. And endoscopy is not a big deal nowadays, because it puts you to sleep, you don't feel it. But back then it was a big deal, because most endoscopies that were done without sedation at all.
It was like some medieval torture.
It was like sword swallowing at the circus.
Yeah.
So, you just drop a tube down, into their stomachs.
I don't know whether I might just die from a disease than
But the
have
fascinating,
somebody shove something down my throat while I'm awake.
well, nowadays it's no big deal, because you go to sleep. But back then, when these guys were doing it, it was truly a parlor trick. I mean, they literally had to, hey, you guys want to come in here and watch this? You're not going to believe what this guy's going to do. He's going to swallow a tube, and we're going to look inside his stomach thing.
Jeez.
And back then, that's what guys that did that stuff did.
Now you have x-rays to make sure it's in the right spot, and you didn't just send it down their trachea.
Not the trachea. You don't want to go there.
but
down their esophagus.
When I did a semester of nursing school and hated it, I remember they were talking about nasogastric tubes, like you do an x-ray to check to make sure you didn't shove it down your trachea.
Yeah. Well, one thing you learn when you're a nurse or nursing student or a medical student is you'll know immediately if you put the NG tube in the wrong place. It doesn't take a genius.
Okay.
That person on the table will tell you right quick.
Ooh.
Because you shove it down between their vocal cords and they get distressed real fast. So you're not asking questions. You don't have to get an x-ray to find out if you've got an NG tube at the carina, in the in the trachea. You'll know real quick. That person's wheezing and gasping for breath, and it's distressing to have something shoved down your windpipe unsedated.
Oh,
so
God.
it's a big deal. And all of us that have done it have been there.
Yeah.
You know, some people don't have much of a ability to swallow when you put something in the back of their throat. They just don't. And so sometimes it'll just have a natural curvature and go right into the windpipe. And you won't know it till you get it down far enough for them to get distressed, but you'll know real quick. They'll turn red-faced and gasp for breath. So yeah, it's a distressing moment. But what I was saying about with these guys, what was fascinating was that they came to these meetings repeatedly to be belittled, and they were in a professional way. They were teased and mocked about their little organism in the stomach, and to the point that I think they became fairly sensitive about it. But ultimately, when it was proven to be true, and antibiotics eradicated peptic ulcer disease essentially from the face of the earth, these guys won a Nobel Prize.
Vindication.
They were like, "Where's your Nobel Prize at?"
You're thinking, that's pretty amazing. I got a big kick out of it because I lived through that when I was a junior medical student. Far and away, the number one operative procedure that was done in the OR was management of ulcers. Back then we had antrectomies and selective and super selective vagotomies and Billroth 1 and Billroth 2 anastomoses. You don't see those ever in medical literature anymore. Nobody talks about any of that stuff. It just fell off the face of the earth when H. pylori was identified. Now, between H. pylori and NSAIDs, non-steroidal anti-inflammatory agents, between those two things, that's it.
Yeah.
That's essentially
Yeah.
the entire picture of peptic ulcer disease. So
Here's some pills, go home,
you'll get well.
see you in 2 weeks,
Yeah.
test for a checkup, and you're good.
And previously, and we still see a few patients that, you know, are in their 70s and 80s who had peptic ulcer disease back in the day when they had 4 stomach operations for ulcers. They had an initial operation which had to be revised and then revised again, and then bowel obstruction from revisions, and oh my gosh, it just
And now you're like, here, take this pill.
take these pills and you're done. It's amazing. Yeah. But the same is true with things like aortic valve replacement. Now they're doing what's called TAVR, which is they can actually take a catheter and go through your groin or your arm to your aortic valve and replace a defective aortic valve. Used to what we called a valvuloplasty, but now they can actually revise the valve through heart catheterization. I mean, used to you had to crack the chest and open the heart, put the patient on a heart-lung bypass machine, and now you can do it with a catheter in a cardiology cath lab. They do them in the ORs in case they have to open their chest, but they're getting to the point where they could start to do these. I always tease my patients about it. I say, one of these days, you're going to be able to walk down the mall to Gallbladders R Us and walk in and get up on the table, and they're going to whip your gallbladder out. I mean, it's coming. The Japanese are already doing transgastric cholecystectomies, which means they take an echo endoscope and go through your mouth and down into your stomach, drill a hole through your stomach from inside your stomach, reach out, put clips on the cystic artery and the cystic duct, and remove the gallbladder and pull it out through the stomach and out through the mouth.
That's so cool. That's really cool.
That's where it's going. You can do endoscopically performed transvaginal colon resections. They'll go through, in a female, can't do it in a male yet, but in a female, because y'all have easier access, but you go through the vaginal wall, through the bladder wall, and do all of your surgery over in the left colon to take the sigmoid colon out. They can remove the sigmoid colon through the bladder, out through the vaginal opening. That's just, when you think about it, that is radical.
That's crazy, yeah.
So that's where it's going to be. We're getting real close to having the tricorder. I mean, we're getting real close.
So my MD PhD professor, so you were talking about, and I'm not necessarily equating this with the like an importance, but you were talking about how they were like mocking him about stuff. Well, my MD PhD professor, he thinks that all of our everything about like cholesterol and high fats being really bad for you is not true.
Turns out he's probably right.
Yeah. He's saying that they took a study. They did rabbits. They took rabbits, which are herbivores, and they were feeding them meat, and they were like, oh, their cholesterol shot up, oh, their arteries. And then they took these countries. They took very specific countries and hand-selected data to try and show this positive correlation between heart disease and high cholesterol, but it turned out to be false, and it's actually sugar, and sugar damages your blood vessels, and sugar will cause these damages in your blood vessels that things will catch on, and is actually a higher reason for somebody getting heart disease and fatty liver even than high fats, and that these countries that were consuming really high fats actually had a decreased chance of getting heart diseases and ailments because they weren't consuming sugar. And now in our society we have so many things that are fat-free but have way more sugar, and we have this horrific diabetes epidemic right now. And so I'm glad that you're like, okay, so he actually had a point, because of course at first I was skeptical because I've always heard, oh, it's full of fat, that's really bad for you.
Yeah, when I was a child, I mean, we were routinely told, don't eat food with fat in it. You carve the fat off your meat, you carve the fat away from your food, that fat kills. Well, then a couple of guys at UT Southwestern identified cholesterol and its, quote, nemesis effect on the human anatomy, and won a Nobel Prize for it. They were able to characterize cholesterol, identify what effect it appeared to have in the pathophysiology of disease. Turns out, while it's probably not inaccurate, it's not reflective of what's actually going on. Probably, just as you stated, glucose, sugar, is probably far more destructive to the human body. When they did some incredible studies to identify, and one of the big issues that came up was that cholesterol, you never could tie cholesterol to dietary intake. They were always able to say that if you ate a high-fat diet, you seem to have more of a tendency to have higher cholesterol in the bloodstream, but never could correlate the two. Well, now lots of people are taking medications to lower their cholesterol.
It's not doing anything.
And the effect you would expect would be far more dramatic than what we're actually seeing.
Yeah.
And so while it probably does have some ameliorating effect, it doesn't appear to have near what you would have predicted it would have. So everybody is beginning to revamp. And when the ketogenic diet came out, or when the keto diet's been around for a long time.
Atkins, though.
That's right. They were the first ones to really make it popular. And the doctor Atkins, who came up with the concept or popularized it, made a lot of money.
Yeah.
And there was a lot of scandal around him and his company, which took a lot of the emphasis off of the success. Yeah. And so what ended up happening was that a lot of the Atkins related stuff that emphasized ketogenesis was really pushed off to the side of the road. And when that happened, the emphasis on it was lost, and everybody was kind of quagmired in the sticking with the low cholesterol, get your blood fat levels down, et cetera, et cetera. And there certainly is merit to getting your blood fats down, no question. But just like you said, it looks like it's going to turn out when the dance stops that blood sugar and what blood sugar does is probably more harmful than what cholesterol does. And when they never could separate manufactured cholesterol from ingested cholesterol. And that was the big thing, was that they kept saying, well, if you eat too much cholesterol, your blood levels will go up. But then when studies were done to look at how they correlated, you never could correlate them. So if you ate a high-fat diet, your cholesterol may or may not be adversely affected. If you eat a high-sugar diet, eventually you're likely going, especially nowadays with highly refined foods the way they are, you're likely going to be a type 2 diabetic if you aren't already. And that's why 73%, I think, of American adults over the age of 40 are obese or overweight. And of that number, a huge percentage are already diabetic
Or
and
pre-diabetic.
soon will be diabetic.
Yeah.
And then there was some additional information that came out. This would have been when I was, first practicing medicine, and that was that type 2 diabetics and type 1 diabetics and then type 3 diabetics had very different metabolic reactivity to sugar, so that the insulin production in the body was very different. And that's what promoted the movement toward type 2 diabetics being insulin resistant, not insulin deficient.
Yeah.
So type 2 diabetics have plenty of insulin. Well, they have enough insulin. The receptors in the cells are just not sensitive. So then all these new medicines started showing up that sensitized the cells and made them more sensitive to insulin and glucose, driving the glucose into the cells. And we've gone down the road a long way with a lot of medications. None of them are as good as insulin. I mean, insulin's the best. But insulin delivery, you can't take an insulin pill. You can't take an insulin suppository. It has to be given in the by injection. So it makes it harder for diabetics to manage their blood sugars because there's a delayed period of time between the injectable medication. If you don't put it straight in the bloodstream, which nobody does,
No.
you can't, practically speaking.
Not unless you had a port or something, and
Yeah.
that's just a pain.
Yeah,
and
yeah,
extra maintenance.
it's just not practical.
Yeah.
So, type 2 diabetics right now are at a disadvantage. Interestingly, where it's all going are these monitors and applicable insulin pumps. Basically, where these companies are going is you're going to be able to put a little round device on your abdomen that measures your blood sugar and gives you insulin in response, just like your pancreas does.
That's amazing. Yeah. That's really cool.
And when you're able to do that, then you're really going to be able to find out whether or not what we're saying here is correct.
Yeah.
That blood sugar fluctuations are what get you in trouble. Cause your eyes to fail, cause your legs and hands not to work very well because the little bitty blood vessels get clogged up.
Yeah.
And it's apparently blood sugar effect more than it is anything else. Fascinating story, but and we got off from H. pylori to diabetes.
Oh,
but
I kind of did that because I've been thinking about this for a while,
well,
and
these people are iconic,
yeah,
and yet they were mocked.
Yeah.
They were belittled by the medical establishment. It just goes to show you how many. You wonder how many ideas are out there right now. You young guys who are thinking about stuff that everybody's going to go, that's silly, and you're going to ultimately be right.
Yeah.
And us old guys are going to be taught another lesson. You need to listen when somebody comes in and has kind of a radical idea. Don't dismiss it until you give it a chance, because what you may be mocking today may win a Nobel Prize 10 years from now.
And that's what was really bothering my professor that started initially researching this, because when he was in medical school, he was giving these patients medications, and then there wasn't really good proof for them in research papers, or he didn't see good reasons for them, and it would really bother him.
Sure.
So that's why he started going into research, because he's like, I can't stand, giving this to somebody unless I definitively understand it and I know all about it.
Well, he's going through the same thing that we all go through, and that is weighing healthcare against the business of healthcare.
Right.
Because they are heavy on both sides, and depending on what time of frame you're talking about, one tends to get way out of tilt with the other. They'll usually swing back, but it takes a while. And one of the hardest things I ever had to deal with when I was a GI fellow was that I had a pharmaceutical company show up at our doorstep offering a lot of money to do a study for them, and their prompting was that we expect certain findings. And when I heard them say that, I thought what they meant was, well, we've done the research, we've looked
And we
at
expect
it,
to have
and here's
something.
what we think will happen.
Yeah.
That's how I interpreted it.
But it
being
was,
naive.
here's the money, we want to hear X, Y, and Z, and if we don't,
Then the money will disappear.
yeah.
Well, that's what my professor had said. He was like, it's just so unethical. There's
Yeah,
people that
yeah.
give into this and they get all this money, and they're
Sure.
selling drugs that they don't really think work.
Sure. And if you look at a lot of these medical schools and a lot of these medical companies who have buildings named after people, a lot of them were generated just like that. They were generated out of money that came out of programs and research development that was derived from that very kind of not very morally correct, ethically correct. Can't say it was illegal, I don't think, but you can say that it just left a bad taste in your mouth. So when you end up participating in those kinds of things and you look back on it and you go, man, I just put my name on something that
Yeah.
I don't agree with. But you really don't have much of a choice if you're in the education field where you've got people over you who see to it.
It's called the shots.
What you write and don't write is not really in your power to change.